the media, which is slurring and slandering Israel, such as The Guardian in Britain or the New York Times and Washington Post in the United States, they have, how can I say, more influence among people like school teachers and academics and policymakers. So even though The Guardian's circulation is lower than that of the Daily Telegraph or Daily Mail, The Guardian is the newspaper which academics and other people of influence, who help form opinions, they read The Guardian more than they read the Daily Telegraph. Likewise in America with the New York Times. Now, clearly, the population is not necessarily swayed by the narrative of some of these news outlets. I'll give you an example away from the conflict. In America, if one was swayed by the voices of the mainstream traditional media, Donald Trump would be on about 2% support. But in fact, opinion polls show he's on about 50%, perhaps even more support. I personally don't support him, but clearly people are not listening to everything they hear about Donald Trump in the New York Times or CNN or so on. If they did, he wouldn't be having so much support. And likewise with Israel, the media, in addition to slandering Israel and also slandering supporters of Israel in the West, which means Jews effectively, they're also damaging themselves and showing themselves to be totally biased and one-sided. And we see it also with academics. Maybe, for example, those heads of the American universities, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, I think it was, who embarrassed themselves in a congressional committee by refusing to say whether calling for the genocide of Jews on campus was something that should be criticized, and they were saying it was context dependent. They may be proud of themselves and they may be getting patted on the back by their fellow academics at Harvard and elsewhere. But in fact, all they're really doing is bringing Harvard and other institutions into disrepute. The general public looks on in bewilderment. So I would like to think that up to a point, the BBC and the New York Times are also embarrassing themselves. That's not to say that they shouldn't criticize Israel where criticism is warranted. They absolutely should criticize Israel. Israel is not perfect. But the sheer exaggerations or concoctions or bias, the sheer obsession with covering Israel as if there's nothing else in the world, as if it's the only thing anybody wants to read about, is not only ridiculous, but one should also ask, is it what their viewers and readers want? So, for example, my neighbor subscribes to the International New York Times, and they give me it every week for me to look through afterwards, the print edition. And it is obsessed by Israel, and this is the international edition. And I'm thinking, why on earth does the New York Times think that its readers in Singapore or Hong Kong or Rio de Janeiro or Sydney, Australia want to read about Israel and Gaza day after day after day? Have they done any internal readership opinion about what their readers actually want to read about? They simply cannot be only interested in one conflict. There is no way that people in Japan or Brazil are so obsessed by Gaza.